Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Click subscribe and check out the Sonic Cinema Podcast on YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, basically wherever you listen to podcasts is available. But you can also get extra stuff like filmmaker interviews and quick take reviews at the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. So this is kind of the end of a year-long project I honestly didn't expect to be a year-long project, as myself and three guests run down our respective choices for the best films of 1996, and I'm really looking forward to sharing these lists. All my guests really did a great job in following their own personal interests, I think, in creating these lists, and that's one of the most exciting things about that. Speaking of those guests, we'll go ahead and introduce everybody. First up is Mathew Timms. You've heard Matthew on the podcast before. We've discussed David Lynch and Ed Wood. We've got a little bit more normal films to discuss this time, but we've also got some weird ones. So, Matthew, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Next up is an actress, Grace Aki. She is an actress, and she had a solo play perform earlier this year called "To Free a Mockingbird." She also hosts the "Tell Me on a Sunday" podcast. Grace, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for mentioning my play. That's so nice.
And concluding is Chelsea. She is one of the co-hosts of the Untitled Cinema Gals project, as well as the Community Rewatch podcast. Chelsea, thank you very much for joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me on. I know you're gonna regret it by the end.
I'm supposed to be the crazy one here.
Oh yeah, I've been on a podcast with Chelsea before, and I have somewhat of an idea of what to expect, but we'll see how it goes. So before we get to the list proper, when Grace sent me hers, she had one honorable mention on there, and I like the idea. In addition, we've got 31 films between the four of us to talk about, but I like the idea of each one having like one film that we want to bring some mention to that was just outside of our top 10. So we're going to start with Grace. What was your honorable mention?
I really appreciate that you let me do an honorable mention because it absolutely doesn't deserve to be in my top 10, but I had to mention that Biodome came out that year because I unfortunately watched it many times in the early 2000s. Like, I think I was just really addicted to like Pauly Shore as like a movement and a meme before memes were a thing. And the fact that like Stephen Baldwin is in this as well, these two, it's like a very like, I mean, it's also in the time of like the Tommy Boy, like bro comedy where it's like two unlikely guys get into some ugly business. And then it's just like, you know, wreaking the havoc of the world that we live in right now where, you know, the world is melting and Smash Mouth All-Star is more prevalent than it ever has been. So I think that Biodome deserves to be on this list of honorable mention. And I hope that you all will let us know what you think about it.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's available on one of the streaming sites. I know I'm not.
It's on
quite sure
HBO Max.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was HBO Max. It was either that or Stars. Yeah,
it's on a reputable streaming service.
It's not on the TCM part of HBO. I want to be very clear. It's not part of the Criterion collection, but it is on HBO. Not yet. But we still, you know, have it. We're getting signatures as we speak. So I'm just go watch it.
I am awaiting that Pauly Shore Criterion box set, certainly. And it was funny because of the fact that my wife had me watch several Pauly Shore movies last year during furlough, and amazingly, Biodome was not one of them. I was kind of surprised by that. Chelsea, what do you have as far as an honorable mention?
This could have gone so many ways, and I will talk about a different film later, but I just have to talk about That Thing You Do because I wanted so bad to put it on my list, but I'm like, I feel like everybody already knows that. It's so well remembered. And I have some very important points to make about other things. But anytime Tom Hanks is doing something silly and fun, I must point it out and give it its love.
I will say one of the things I was most surprised about on these lists is that thing you do was not on one of them. I was very surprised about that. I rewatched it recently because I had a feeling it would come up, and it is just such a fun movie. That song is one of the great earworms in movie songs.
One of the greats.
And I mean, Tom Everett Scott is just really good in that lead role, and Liv Tyler.
He's
is
very hot. He's very
so
hot
hot
on the drums. What's going on there?
Why is he not being hot in more things right now for me? Why?
Well, it's funny because of the fact that I noticed somewhat of a... I noticed that he sort of seemed like a younger Tom Hanks, and I have a feeling that's part of the reason why Hanks cast him in the role.
Yep. That's literally it. Also,
It
last
really
year
is.
they did in quarantine, they did a cast Zoom. They all got together for the first time since filming, and I aggressively watched it when it was live on YouTube because it was also like a charitable thing. And because I had put together a PowerPoint asking everyone where is Steve Zahn, and so literally the very next month they produced. And I just want to say, whatever my campaign was, it worked.
It worked.
Yeah, and I think that was
You
one
all
of the...
have your power.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the first moments Steve Zahn was in a significant role in a movie. And yeah, he just hit the ground running as far as scene stealing. Matthew, what would you say is an honorable mention among these outside of these films?
Well, it's interesting that we wound up doing an honorable mention because the one thing I wanted to put on my list but didn't think I could was a movie that didn't even come out in 1996. The most profound experience I had in a movie theater was seeing the re-release of Vertigo, actually. And I had seen the movie before, like on a videotape, and the colors were all runny, and it just looked dreadful, and I didn't understand it at all. And to be fair, I was too young to understand it. And so in 1996, I saw it again at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. So, and for those of you who don't know it, it's this grand old movie palace that mostly now shows... They have live shows, concerts and plays and things. But I got to see this beautiful 70 millimeter print on a double bill with Psycho. And like I said, I still didn't understand it at that point, but the colors were so hypnotic. The music really got inside my skin somehow. And I found the movie so hypnotizing and profound that even though I didn't really understand what was going on, I couldn't really identify with the characters at that age. I still just kind of... Something about it was important.
It was a vibe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was something about it that I knew, like, I have to watch this again because one day it's going to click for me, and it eventually did. But it was a really profound experience of, I know I don't understand this, but there's something about it I love, and I have to go back to it. And it was really, really amazing. And and it wasn't a movie that actually came out that year. It was just a luck of the draw.
But honestly, I will say I respect the fact that you include that because of the fact that I remember that re-release being a big deal because it was fully restored for the first time, beautifully restored, and I missed that re-release, unfortunately. I will save my personal thoughts on Vertigo because I actually spent a good amount of time with Chelsea's co-host on Untitled Chapter, Morgan, discussing Hitchcock and Vertigo earlier this year. But I will say, yeah, I really regret missing that re-release. But I did get a chance to see it on the big screen a few years ago, and yes, it is amazing on the big screen. And I've got a Fox Theater story that we're gonna hit later on in the podcast.
Wonderful.
And so that brings up my honorable mention. This is one that I so desperately wanted to put on my top 10. I couldn't quite find room for it, but it is Big Night, directed by Stanley Tucci and Campbell Scott, as a couple brothers who run an Italian restaurant, and they're in financial issues, and they are trying to have one big night and trying to do what they can to save their business. And you see the dynamics between the brothers, Tucci and Chaluber, brilliant in their roles. Many drivers in it. Ian Holm is in it. There are so many wonderful actors in this. It's just such a great ensemble piece. And the final scene of the movie where Stanley Tucci is cooking an omelet is probably one of my favorite scenes regarding food I've ever seen in a movie. Is just so wonderful, and it sums up everything so beautifully in that movie.
I'm going to have to find it now. That sounds really intriguing.
It was on Paramount Plus earlier this year, but I don't think it's available. But I did actually get to see it at the Plaza when it was out in 96, 97. And it's just such a wonderful film. So with that, we are going to get started with the lists, and we're going to start off with number 10. We're going to kind of go around the room here, and let's start with Grace. What is your number 10?
So my number 10 is the iconic, should have won multiple awards classic, The Preacher's Wife. It is based on The Bishop's Wife. I don't care about that because all I care about is Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston establishes that she is an absolute megastar, even though she always establishes that anytime she walks into a room. It's directed by Penny Marshall. Again, we don't give Penny Marshall enough credit for literally everything that she's ever done. But this movie is just so cute. And I think that there was definitely like a rebirth of rom-coms, especially, and I know Chelsea and I feel the same way about this with Nora Ephron and whatnot, but this one I feel like always gets skirted when you talk about the 90s rom-coms, and you've got like Whitney Houston, Denzel Washington, and Courtney B. Vance. Mm-hmm. And that alone is like, are you kidding? And
so many hot people. You're going to hear me and Grace talk about hot people a lot because that's what we come for. But oh my goodness.
So many hot people. Also, Jennifer Lewis. Jennifer
Lewis is there, and Loretta Devine.
Yeah, literally the first 10 minutes of the movie, they're in church, and Whitney Houston like looks over to like the congregation to like sing background like one-word snippets of Courtney B. Vance's sermon, and it is the funniest thing. And it's just like, dang, the expectations are always so low on that one, and for me, they raise the bar.
Yeah, it's. I didn't get a chance to see it this year so far. I will be seeing it over the holiday because I do have a VHS of it still. Yeah,
but it's a perfect holiday movie because it's like snowy and sweet, and I guess religion, but I don't care.
And
it's like there's religion, but it's not annoying.
No, that is an excellent point, and that is that's one of the things that really works about it too. And Whitney Houston, I mean, she did not do many movies, but when she did, she picked ones that played to her strengths. And this one is another one that just does a terrific job. And it's one of the first movies that really kind of shows a lighter side of Denzel that we haven't seen nearly enough over the years. And the dynamics between them and Courtney B. Vance is just lovely in this film. And the late great Penny Marshall, I need to be watching and reviewing more movies of hers for Sonic Cinema. I'm going to start with this one.
But I want to quickly say this just to finish it. There were 2 movies that came out in 1996 where a dude was just a hot angel, and that was Michael and this one. So I'm just saying, John Travolta, like, step aside. Denzel took the cake for me.
Easily hotter. What are we talking about?
Easily hotter, especially 96. Come on.
Oh. I go rewatch that after. That was almost on my list.
I believe it.
Just about every movie we talk about that isn't on my list was almost on my list. Like, I have I've got the list of all the things I scratched out that I didn't include, and almost everything on that list that I don't have on there is just like, well, I almost mentioned this one, almost mentioned that one. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is gonna be a lot of movies that I'm glad somebody else put this movie on my list because I do want to mention it. I mean, I know there's one in particular on a list we're going to talk about that is definitely would have been on my list, but I also knew that the person was going to put that on their list, so we get to talk about it. Chelsea, what is your number 10?
Okay, so my number 10, keeping up with one thing I really need in movies is more people above the age of 35 doing rom-coms. So I picked The Mirror Has Two Faces because much like Denzel, Jeff Bridges is so hot in the 90s. Oh my goodness, he should have been in The Prince of Tides too. I have talked about this before. He is so handsome in this. It's silly, it's fun. You get Lauren Bacall getting to be like a mother character, but like very vain and egotistical and fun. And it's just what I want her to do. I don't need like the old woman going there and having the tragedy and stuff. It's like, no, have some fun with it. And Babs, anytime she's on screen, anytime she's directing, I just need her to direct more movies because she brings a different flavor to everything she does. And this is just a treat of a film. I just need more romance in my life.
Also on Netflix. So I'm going to try to say if there's any way to stream any of the movies that we talk about, I'll just throw it in. Netflix, you can watch The Mirror with Two Faces.
I also have a DVD because that's me.
You guys, sorry, Brian.
No,
you guys don't know my wife, but my wife is a horror fanatic. She's a true crime fanatic. She loves things that bleed. She loves gore. She loves crazy things. Does not like romantic comedies. Does not like musicals. Doesn't like most girly things. She really liked the Mirror Has Two Faces. And when I was showing her the list of things, she was like, "Do you want to watch that?" Like, yeah. Like, this is one of the few that she likes. So this is something special. And when she put it on, she's like, "Bet you're surprised, aren't you?" Like, "Yep, sure am." But it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen this one. I haven't seen this one since the 90s. I will say the thing that sticks out to me the most about it is Lauren Bacall's daggers. She was staring at the Oscars when she lost the Oscar for this. It's one
she
of those...
lost the Oscar to Count Chocula. That's what it was. Juliette Binoche was in a Count Chocula dress that night.
Absolutely not.
That'll do it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that performance a bit later.
We will.
But
I would have gave her the Oscar because also you don't get a lot of Oscars for anything in the romantic comedy dramedy genre very much anymore. Like, we're lucky to get a nomination, and I'm like, not everything has to be so serious. We can have a good time too and give awards.
Yeah. I mean, Lauren Bacall, I'm more familiar with The Big Sleep with her, but
so
I mean,
good.
now that I've seen some more of her older work, it's like you can definitely have more of an appreciation for something like The Mirror Has Two Faces or any of the other movies she did later in her career.
Well, even something like Misery, where she's in 2 scenes, I think she has a real presence. And it's kind of wonderful that you intentionally pick someone like that who you know is going to have an impact.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Matthew, what is your number 10?
Well, I'm glad you opened the door for this because I have I had trouble trying to figure out what order to put everything in. And I don't normally do top 10 lists for this reasons. Normally I just kind of, put down everything I liked and that was it.
And
usually because I have difficulty trying to figure out, I can figure out a top 5 pretty easy, but then the types of movies I like are very disparate, and I have a lot of trouble deciding, since they're trying to accomplish different things, what is really like number 7 or 8 I have trouble with. So I decided to do my top 10 list in the order they came out, and number 10 is From Dusk Till Dawn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you want to talk about hot people? That movie has got it.
Yeah.
And I'm a really big fan of Robert Rodriguez. I love his do-it-yourself kind of aesthetic. I love the fact that he's trying to evangelize to young filmmakers about how to make movies in a cost-effective way. And a fan of Tarantino too, but for some reason I've always felt a little stronger about Robert Rodriguez,
Mhm.
and I love that this movie is kind of a marriage of their styles.
Yeah.
Like usually when you have two directors involved, there's some friction or there's some sort of competing visions. But in this one, it just felt like they all work together. Like you get sort of some of the best picks from each of their um, sort of regular cast.
Mhm.
You get some of their usual sort of trick shots, like the inside the trunk shot and things like that. I just kind of love how it's this really nice marriage of two renegades at that particular moment.
Mhm.
And I love that there's this bonkers mid-movie twist that doesn't really make sense but kind of plays fun. I love that almost all the background actors are people who were killed in Desperado wearing the same costumes that they were killed in. Like there's just so many little delightfully silly things about this movie that make me adore it.
Yeah, Rodriguez is somebody that I've definitely admired over the years. And I enjoyed Desperado, and I was a Tarantino fan by this time. When I first saw this, it kind of bounced off of me. I think probably because I was not as familiar with some of the type of movies that Rodriguez and Tarantino were familiar with, to where they would, this is in a way, it's kind of a proto Grindhouse, except
Certainly.
they're collaborating on one movie as opposed to making their own separate movies. I rewatched it a few days ago, and one of the things that I really liked is I really liked the initial crime element of it, of the getaway they have to get across the border and stuff like that. When it gets to the bar with the vampires, I'm not as interested in it.
To be fair, the first half is the better movie.
Yeah.
But I like them both for different reasons.
Oh yeah, I mean it's something it's enjoyable to watch for a lot of different reasons throughout, especially with people like Danny Trejo and Tom Savini in that second half, and seeing how those characters interact.
It's interesting that half of the people in that movie are legends in that world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I could go on about that for too long, and we need to keep going, I suppose.
Yeah. Do you, Grayson and Chelsea, do you have anything to say about From Dusk Till Dawn?
It's one of the few times people being sweaty in a film is actually hot and not concerning for me.
I have no comment because it's a blind spot for me. So can't wait to watch.
Okay.
Thanks for your rec.
It is on HBO Max as well, actually. So yeah. So that brings us to my number 10, which will be on HBO Max as well, because it was technically an HBO documentary. I saw it at the Georgia State University screening room in 1996, so that's part of why it is included here. It is Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky's Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills. It is the first of their 3 documentaries about the West Memphis 3 case. The amazing thing about this movie is just the absolute unfettered access they had to every aspect of the initial trial. And they were able to film in the courtrooms. They were able to talk to the victims' parents. They were able to talk to the teenagers who were essentially railroaded as the killers. And it's fascinating to watch these 3 movies and see sort of the evolution of the individuals as well as the evolution of the case and how it changes at certain points in time. And this is one that had an impact on me. Part of the reason I was interested is because of the fact that it was one of the rare times at the time that Metallica had allowed their music to be used in a film, but because of the fact that it was a favorite of Damien Eccles, it was important for them to have it, so they allowed them to use it. And if you're not familiar with the West Memphis 3, it really is something that shows that it's one of the stories at the tail age of the end of the Satanic Panic era of the 80s and early 90s. And especially if you're familiar with that era, you'll definitely see a lot of the same ideas of faith and outcasts and people who are not the same as the rest of the community coming through. And it's a powerful movie. It is all three of the Paradise Lost movies or documentaries are on HBO Max, and they're well worth watching.
I do love documentaries, so I'll probably check that out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I am fascinated with the Satanic Panic, and I'm fascinated in general with the way these kinds of things spread. And I did a lot of research for it for a screenplay I wrote recently, and it's kind of astounding how many ways you can get people to believe insane things.
Yeah.
And I know if we really dove into it, we could get into QAnon and that kind of thing. And we don't have time for that. But it's really amazing how quickly misinformation can grow.
Yeah, and I mean, especially in an area like in Arkansas, like where this takes place, you can really kind of see how the religiosity and the evangelical Christianity that is a fundamental part of that community really could lead into this idea of, especially when you hear the tragic stories of how the children were found, and you can really kind of see how that type of idea permeates. Yeah, this was one that I knew I definitely had to have on my top 10 list. It was because it's just had such an impact on me as a documentary as well as a piece of film in general. So we're going to continue on with number 9, and Chels, why don't you start off? Matthew's number 9 is actually going to be later in the episode. Chelsea, what is your number 9?
Well, I know Jane Campion's having a moment right now because she's got some power with her dogs, and I like that movie, but also want to shine some light on one of her other ones that a lot of people actually haven't seen, and that's The Portrait of a Lady. We got Nicole Kidman. We got Mary Louise Parker in glasses, which is a very specific thing for me and probably Grace.
I was truly about to chime in. Keep going.
We got Barbara Hershey being a little schemy. And then there's a bunch of men that all look alike to me, honestly. But it's a beautifully made film. It's a good time. I love period piece schemers and manipulation and romance where men are so disposable, literally in so many ways. And I highly recommend everyone check it out. Jane Campion. Woohoo!
Yeah, and this one's on Paramount Plus, and I really wanted to get to it. Before this record because I haven't seen it in 24 years. But because of Power of the Dog, I'm so curious to go back to Jane Campion's earlier work and revisit some of it, as well as see some of it that I haven't had a chance to see yet. But yeah, this was her follow-up to The Piano. And
this is a beautiful film. I cannot emphasize just the production design and the cinematography. And it's Nicole Kidman in that sweet spot before Oscar got a hold of her, where she's doing actually really cool and interesting stuff. Like, she's always doing that, but it's not always Oscar bait in many ways. And it's just kind of like her before the Academy gets her talents. And I just I'm super obsessed.
I think you're saying Tom Cruise wrong. I think you're mispronouncing Cruise.
Cruise?
Yeah, we all agree.
Yeah. But other than that, great take. Yeah.
Well, I mean, she was.
Go watch it.
They
were married.
She was still with Cruise at the time. But it was.
She was still cruising.
Yeah.
But she was doing a lot.
Did you have a chance to see this, Matt?
I haven't. No, I haven't. And it's a shame because I like some of her films. There was one in particular that I can't think of the name of right now that really kind of got under my skin. But I wanted to see it. Sweetie, that was the name of it. Yeah, that was a super strange movie. And, and I know that she tends to pick really good cinematographers. She makes very beautiful looking films. Mm-hmm. And so I've been wanting to see it, and I just haven't had the opportunity yet.
Yeah.
Also, Mary Louise Parker and glasses, a very big thing for me.
That works for me too. Yeah. So you've given me all the more reason to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you for that.
I'll probably go revisit that one in the near future. So that we're gonna go to my number 9, and it is John Sayles' Lone Star. And one of the things that you'll find kind of interesting is that there are a lot of these movies that are kind of off the grid and not terribly available right now. Lone Star is definitely one of those, and it's a shame because it really is a fantastic film that speaks to a lot of things that we're still struggling with when it comes to racism, when it comes to prejudice, especially on the Texas border. And it is a fantastic movie. It's got Chris Cooper. It's got Matthew McConaughey, who plays Chris Cooper's father, but it's not as weird as it sounds because he is in flashback. And this was right around the time A Time to Kill came out, so it was right as Matthew McConaughey was having his first moment. It's just a wonderful look at small town life and it's a murder mystery. It has prejudice that these characters are dealing with. Joe Morton is in it. Elizabeth Pena is in it. If you get a chance to watch it, I cannot recommend it enough. It's a shame that it's not more available. I basically had to rent it from Videodrome, the video store in downtown Atlanta, in order to see it. And I'm glad I did. It's really quite a movie, and it's well worth checking out. It really does say a lot of things that's important for us to hear now.
Rest in peace, Elizabeth Pena.
So, Grace, what is your number 9?
Oh man, you're asking me as a freshman in high school language arts teacher? I guess you are, because it's The Crucible, baby. That's right.
Hey, I watched it too then.
Yeah. I will throw out that I am aggressively addicted to this play, as I am that whole witchery nonsense. And the fact that this was penned by Arthur Miller for the screenplay makes it, to me, like perfectly purist as far as like a movie adaptation of a play. This was, to me, Daniel Day-Lewis's hottest moment. Him screaming because it is my name sends me every time. Winona Ryder is also at the peak of Winona Ryder, crazy witchdom. This is like before Girl Interrupted. She is giving us star power. Everybody else in it is just like, another 90s, like famous white, if you will. You've got like Joan Allen, who was like perfectly poised to play every angry woman mom in everything. Like, look at The Notebook. She's perfect.
She is such a great mom character. I love her so much.
She's got a stern chin, and she wears it well.
She does.
So I just feel like this belonged on the list because it just doesn't happen often where something is adapted from a play into a movie so well. Mm-hmm. And every kid has to read this in school. And the fact that we got this as a gift for most students after that year, chef's kiss. I did offer to read every single character when we had to read it aloud in class. And the only one I was like, I'm going to abstain from Tituba, but otherwise let me go for it. And it was just, I think it's a wonderful adaptation. So yeah.
Yeah, I just rewatched this over the weekend, and Joan Allen probably should have won the Oscar for this one. She was absolutely fantastic. I love the acting in this movie. If I have one issue with this, is that I don't think Nicholas Heidner, the director, quite went. There are so many moments in this that still even though it's location shooting, it still kind of feels stage written in terms of its direction, in terms of its camera placement. But as far as the performances are incredible. And you're absolutely right about Daniel Day-Lewis, Joan Allen, Winona Ryder. Everybody in this movie is bringing it. It is fantastic. this very nearly hit my top 10 after the rewatch. It was absolutely fantastic.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the staginess of it, because part of me almost wishes that they had taken a Night of the Hunter approach to it, where, you know, it's got this surreal kind of quality to it. And because the movie almost looks a little too, like, if it's going to be boxed in and kind of stagey, you might as well just kind of go all the way with it. But it is marvelous just as it is, and I have no right to criticize, so that's just a personal taste.
Yeah, and like so many Fox movies, it's kind of not really on the streamers right now, which is a shame. I mean, I rented it on Amazon, so it's available for rent. But yeah, it's really a wonderful adaptation of the material.
And it is always nice to see the playwright get to adapt their own work, because oftentimes they will add or subtract things that someone else might not consider.
Yeah.
Like, I was thinking about Doubt recently, and there's so much in that that's not in the play, but it works because, you know, it was something that the playwright intended, instead of it being just something somebody else came up with because, well, who cares, you know? So it's really nice to see that kind of power and authority, and to know that they are sort of happy with how it's coming together.
Chelsea, did you have anything more to add?
No, everyone pretty much said it. I watched this film in my high school English class, and it was a good time. Big fan.
So that's going to take us to number 8. And Matthew and Grace, their number 8s are going to be coming up a bit later. So we're going to start off with mine. And it is, let me just say right off the bat, in his first 2 feature films, Alexander Payne was the political satirist that Adam McKay wishes he was. And his debut in that was a wonderful comedy called Citizen Ruth. Has the brilliant Laura Dern as a down on her luck mother who is basically given herself up to sniffing paint and is on the streets. She's always getting into trouble. She has 3 kids that she doesn't, with one guy that she doesn't really have any experience with, and she gets pregnant. And the judge gives her a choice of you can either have the baby or go to jail, or have an abortion and you won't have to go to jail, which is a really weird choice in the times of what we're currently living in. And the film becomes a political satire about the pro-life versus pro-choice. And one of the things that's so interesting about this film to me is, and one of the things that works so effectively about it, is that the screenplay by Payne and Jim Taylor, it really approaches both sides of it and shows that essentially there are times where both sides are kind of nuts in how they approach it, and how the politics of an issue can get in the way and we forget the person at the center of the debate. And I think that's an important thing to discuss. Kurtwood Smith in this is absolutely great as a pro-life evangelical Christian who almost begrudgingly takes Ruth in, but we see that they take Ruth in for political purposes. And there's so many wonderful character actors and so many supporting actors in this. It's really a wonderful dark comedy. And again, it's another movie that was on Paramount Plus. It's a Miramax film, so you will occasionally see Miramax come up on Paramount now that they kind of own the rights to those movies. But it's really a wonderful movie, and I really wish that as much as I really like Alexander Payne's work post-election, I kind of, rewatching this made me really kind of wish he had continued in a political satire vein, because I think he could have been one of our greats in that respect.
Agreed. This was almost my also battling with that thing you do, and Mirror has two faces for my last slot, so I'm glad it's mentioned on here.
I almost feel like Election was the end of a cycle, and I haven't liked anything he's done past that quite as much. I share your feeling. I wish he'd kind of stuck in that vein because it feels like he has a lot of interesting things to say, but sometimes doesn't know how to present them necessarily. And
Yeah.
it does get a bit awkward sometimes because I know the passion's there, but sometimes they don't quite come together, in my opinion. And I don't want to talk smack about somebody, but I don't want to give the impression that I'm just trying to wear him down. But like I really feel like he had a certain concise vision for what he was doing up to a certain point, and it seems a little vaguer now. But
Grace, did you have any thoughts on Citizen Ruth? Have you had a chance to see it?
No, but I can't wait to watch it.
Yeah.
It's a good one. You'll like it.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. So that brings us to Chelsea's number 8. What do you have for us?
It is my favorite genre of film. It is called Being Gay, Doing Crimes. It is the Wachowskis' debut, Bound. Jennifer Tilly, Gina Gershon, Mafia. They are scheming. They are stealing. It is a queer love story with a happy ending. They just ride off. It is wonderful and wild and weird, and I love it so much.
Wait, how can we watch?
I will figure that out. Give me
Okay, cool.
1 second. But Bill Pope does the cinematography. It is the fact that it is a debut is wild to me, and it should have been the first indication that we have queer master filmmakers amongst us. Let's see. It is available to rent and then on some streaming service with ads, but it's not loading.
Okay.
Pluto TV with ads.
Oh, yes, I will. Thank you. Good.
Please watch it. It is, again, Being Gay, Doing Crimes, my favorite genre.
And it also has one of Joe Pantoliano's best performances as somebody who is wound way too tightly and gets in way over his head, too.
And like very well done sex scenes between Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon. I'm just amazed this film was able to sail away and be as gay as it was in the 90s. And there was, spoilers, no death to either of them.
Yeah.
Like I have to say that as a queer person because we don't always want to watch ourselves die. It is so nice to not see myself in like those characters and not die. It's great.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of it when it first came out, but I've since come around to it since rewatching it. I've rewatched it a couple of times in the past couple of years, and yeah, it is really a clever, and I think it was because I wasn't as familiar with film noir at the time, but now that I am, I really appreciate that level of what the Wachowskis are doing in that movie.
It's wonderful. More Bound.
Well, and Jennifer Tilly is a force in everything. She's marvelous, and she has great star power. And part of what I love is that she's willing to make fun of herself. Like if you've seen Seed of Chucky or the new Chucky TV show, there's a lot of references to herself and her career, but especially a few references to Bound. And there's a sense of kind of that I don't take myself too seriously, which I really adore. And her social media presence is great, and I kind of I really appreciate that because it's so easy to see people kind of get a big head about themselves. And to what you were saying about the not dying thing is really interesting because I can't tell you how many times I have seen a queer film where I absolutely love the characters, my heart pours out to them, and then one of them's gotta die at the end.
It's a whole trope, and there's some great literature
Yeah.
and theory and research about it. It's the bury your gays, and it's just like it really came about 5 years ago when within a 13-week span, tons and tons of queer, mostly women characters on TV were killed, and people decided we should have a conversation about this. And it's like, no, we've been talking forever. We always die. What do you expect?
Well, I like that there's finally a term for it because even in fairly recent years, like A Simple Man and things like that, there's just really marvelous movies, and then somebody dies right at the end for no reason. Like, oh, okay.
It's the Hays Code nonsense that's still lingering.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you brought that up. Since I'm not a part of the tribe, I don't know if I have standing to bring up some of these issues, but I care
Bring it
about
up.
them. Okay.
If they die, especially in some dumb way, like a stray bullet, or it's like,
The blood
oh,
is on your
Yeah.
hands for not talking about it.
Okay, as long as I know where we stand.
but
good.
also,
All right.
Bound is just a good time. It is so
Yeah.
much fun.
Yeah, it really is, and I'm glad that the Wachowskis have found more of an audience. I mean, I've had my issues with The Matrix, but it's like I still am not as big a fan of those as other people are, but I'm glad we're getting a fourth one because it's one of those things where it's like the fact that they were able to continue to make movies after Bound and The Matrix, it really is a credit to how talented they are. So we're going to go to number 7. Chels's number 7 is going to be discussed later. We're going to start with Matthew's. What is your number 7 in one of the films that I would have put on here because you
Except
know
you
how
knew I
much
was
I
going
love this
to.
movie.
Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie. And it's one of those things that is kind of odd because it didn't succeed in what it was trying to do. They wanted to bring this silly TV show to the big screen, and it got released in a weird way, so nobody saw it on the big screen. Everyone saw it on video or on cable. But one of the things I love about it is that it's a very clear distillation of what the show was and in its new iteration continues to be. So if someone's not familiar with the show, that's a thing you can show them to introduce them. Like it lays out clearly what everything is, and it's not too long, it's not too ponderous, it's not, the movie, they didn't start with Manos or something like that. They didn't go for a movie that's too hard for a mainstream audience to appreciate. And if you look at the more recent seasons on Netflix and stuff, this is kind of the prototype for what they're doing now. They're doing widescreen color movies with bigger budgets. It's kind of it sort of started the new phase of it in a way. Like it's kind of set the ground rules for what they're doing now. And this is something I guess is weird among the fandom, but I always like the MST3K episodes better when the movies are better. Because some of those movies are just a bit of a slog to get through.
Yeah.
But I like the ones that are more kind of earnestly fun, where they're kind of just taking up space in the slow parts or kind of teasing a goofy performance or something, or pointing out the zippers. Like it's more fun when the movie's more fun. And I appreciate that they took what is a pretty good movie, just a little goofy, and kind of, teased it along. And I think if you and I were to put on this island Earth, we could probably do the whole thing. Without really having to think about it.
Yeah, I probably remember way too much of this dialogue. I mean, it's funny. I think this is right up there with Airplane as one of the most quotable comedies of all time and one of the funniest comedies of all time. And my mother and I had just gotten into Misty a few months before this came out, and we saw this a few times in theaters. We drove down to Phipps Plaza to watch it because that's the only place where it was, and laughed our asses off every single time. And it's like, it's funny, they're jokes I'm still just now like, oh, okay, now I understand that joke. And I'm not entirely sure I completely agree with you on. I do agree with you that some of the horrible movies that they do are very much slogs, but I do think at some point you do have to introduce somebody to a Manos, to a Monster Go-Go to really show some of the more what they're capable of when they're being genuinely punished by just unadulterated shit. And this Island Earth was such a perfect choice for this movie because of the fact that it's B movie sci-fi. it's basically what they're familiar with, but it's a slightly better one. Also, if you're familiar with E.T., you'll also recognize the movie in a couple of scenes in E.T. So yeah, I may
Well,
start.
it actually shows up. It shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
Like it's referenced in some of Rob Zombie's movies. It's the Misfits have done songs about it. Like it's just kind of everywhere. But it's one of those things that, you know, a horror audience now or a sci-fi audience of younger people might not be familiar with. So it's kind of nice to have a way of kind of introducing it to them that they might not rebel at, because it does get a little dull in spots and it is kind of cheesy, and so it's kind of nice to have a package to be like, look, here's this cool thing you should see.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think the movie is available anywhere. But it's if you do get a chance to watch it, it's really a wonderful. And if you're not familiar with Mystery Science Theater 3000, it's a good primer, like Matt said. If you are familiar with it and you haven't had a chance to see it, I do think it's a huge piece of the puzzle of what makes them great.
And also, it does manage to sneak in a couple of really sneaky in-jokes for longtime fans.
Yeah.
But they're kind of things that would completely go over your head if you weren't familiar or if you weren't looking for them. So it's one of those things that newbies can go into completely cold and still have a good time. But if you are a fan already, you can appreciate these other things.
Yeah. Anything from Grace and Chelsea? Well, Matthew and I are just geeking out about this movie.
I've never seen this before.
Never seen the film, only seen the episodes of the television series. So
Didn't even
I only
watch
see-
that.
It's cute.
Okay.
It's not. Admittedly, it's not for everybody, but if once you get on its wavelength, it's really entertaining. So with that, Grace, what is your number 7?
All right, guys. Once again, I am talking about a play that is also a movie, and that is Hamlet, because I will reference multiple times in this pod that this was a year where Shakespeare said, "What if I got my groove back?" And the filmmaker said, "I would like that for you as well." Mainly dudes. So this dude, in fact, Kenneth Branagh, said, "What if I put myself as Hamlet and then also directed the film?" And everybody was just like, "I guess." And Kate Winslet is also in it. She is a young starlet. I mean, come on. This film is so very stacked and indeed 4 hours long. And I did watch it in high school in language arts class. So it was a good year for plays as movies. And this one is just so extensive and lovely. Shakespeare did not appear to write the screenplay for this one, as he was very dead. But Robin Williams is in the movie, which to me, weird, because Chelsea and I actually messaged on the side about this. This was one of Robin Williams' years. I'm just saying.
He was having a moment.
Like an aggressive, what if I was everywhere? I don't know if he was on drugs in that year, because you had to have been to have done all the projects that he did. But,
and even if he wasn't on drugs, he was on one.
One of my favorites, Billy Crystal's just there digging a grave at the beginning, casually. Jack Lemmon, who, I mean, grumpy old Met, guys, this was a year. So I'm just saying, if you're going to watch an adaptation of Hamlet, this one is the hottest.
And don't do what my teacher did and show me the Mel Gibson one.
Oh, that's disrespectful.
Only because it was shorter.
No, babe, I went to a public school. We had access to this one. Thank you.
I went to it too. It's bad.
I really wanted to rewatch this one, but because of how long
you didn't
it was,
have
it was
4 hours?
completely prohibitive. But no, I wasn't as used to longer movies at the time. I think that was kind of where it's like, this is really long. I'm not sure how much I like this, but I definitely want to give it another chance, because I need to get more into Branagh's Shakespearean adaptations anyway, but also because of the fact that I have much more of an appreciation for epic movies now, and what I do remember of this is being quite handsomely produced and really compelling.
We should also mention that Kenneth Branagh did A Midwinter's Tale earlier this year, so Shakespeare was kind of having a moment right then.
Mm-hmm.
And
He also did like the Much Ado, right? No.
It was a huge.
I also watched that one, and that is hot people cinema.
That is one of the
Different year, but
hottest
yes.
openings. I was like, this is aggressive.
Here's
I'm-
the thing. I know Shakespeare had a thing going and Branagh pretty faithful, but in his Much Ado, I wanted Denzel Washington and Emma Thompson to hook up so bad. I almost just said something, and I don't know if I can curse on this podcast, but I wanted them to.
Though they needed to fuck. And I really don't
needed to.
appreciate Keanu Reeves just in general in the film. I think it's a strange choice for a strange character. And there's a time for Keanu, and that wasn't it.
Yeah.
But that we're not here to talk about that. The end
We're
is
not.
go watch Hamlet if you have 4 hours, and if not, I hope you went to a public school.
Yay, Hamlet.
Yay,
It
Hamlet.
is marvelous, and I was wanting to point out Robin Williams and Billy Crystal and Jack Lemmon and like, oh, you did it, great. But it's one of those things not a lot of people remember those performances from the film because Kate Winslet is so center to it, and Kenneth Branagh, of course. And it's funny because I often look at when actors direct themselves as in films as the lead role is kind of like vanity project, but. He was marvelous, and so was Barbara Streisand in The Mirror Who Has Two Faces. Like, this was a very good year for actors who really know how to direct to really focus it.
No, I mean this was definitely a time where earlier in the decade we had Kevin Costner win an Oscar for directing, we had Clint Eastwood win an Oscar for directing, we had Mel Gibson win an Oscar for directing, and this was definitely a moment, and we've got at least 2 more of actors directing themselves and directing movies coming up, and it's definitely one of those things that's in the air, and it's great that you have when you have an actor that understands their strengths and plays to them as well as Branagh did in his best work, I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful. So that brings us to my number 7, which is Jan de Bont's Twister, and the last time he was ever this good of a director, which is mind-boggling because he only made 2 films that were really this good. So this is my Fox Theater experience because my mom and I went to the Atlanta premiere of this. She was in Women in Film. She was an actress, and she was working on being an actress. And so, so we were caught wind of the fact that they were doing the Atlanta premiere at the Fox Theater. We went to this, and it's one of the best experiences I've ever had. That opening, from the opening tornado, it just is amazing. The screenplay by Michael Crichton and his wife, it's a very perfunctory adventure screenplay. The characters are pretty standard, but it's the cast that really delivers it. You have Bill Paxton, you have Helen Hunt, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Alan Ruck, Cary Elwes, and you've got Jan de Bont working with the visual effects artists at ILM to create some of the most holy shit tornado effects we've ever seen in movies. And the set pieces in this movie are fantastic. I love the score. I love the soundtrack. I love the Shining sequence. This was before I even saw The Shining, so now that I've seen The Shining a dozen times, I'm so much more familiar with it and appreciate even more. And I just love this as pure escapism. This is just one of the best examples of effects-driven escapism we got in the 90s.
Oh yeah, the special effects are great. The cast really, they do elevate it over the rather serviceable characterizations and plot. Like, it's all fine, but everyone really brings their A game and elevates it to something more than it could have been in different hands.
Yeah.
As a frequent tornado watcher throughout my life, because I live in the Midwest, good tornadoes, good times. I've watched many from my porch.
Good to know.
Yeah.
The only thing I remember is the cow and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and then I don't really know what else happens.
Phil Hoffman! My
Yeah.
dude.
Billy Hoff.
In one of his craziest performances too. Like he definitely makes an impression in this movie. But yeah, so my number 7 is Twister, which brings us to number 6. And Chels, what is your number 6?
Oh, goodness. Believe my number 6, if I'm doing math correctly, is Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies. Just came out on a beautiful Criterion this past year. And basically, mother-daughter story, hijinks ensue, adoption, tracing back. Everyone go watch it. It's fun. I don't want to talk too much about that one because it's very interesting and funny. And Mike Leigh, all of his films are kind of weird and quirky. It's like a drama, but is it? So I recommend it.
Grace, what is your number 6?
Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So my number 6 is Mars Attacks, which is arguably one of Tim Burton's best films, in my opinion. Anytime you can slap a dog body onto Sarah Jessica Parker, I think you've made a good film. The last time I watched this was actually last year during the inauguration because the world was burning. So yeah, it's an absolutely bizarre movie. Jack Nicholson being the most Jack Nicholson possibly that he's ever been, I would argue. It's just kukuluku. And anytime I see a woman aggressively staring that is very tall with high hair, I'm like, is she an alien? So yeah, I just think that this belongs on the list of absurd and fun comedies.
Okay,
and yes, she is an alien.
Yeah. Matthew, what is your number 6?
My number 6 is Dead Man, the Jim Jarmusch film. It's this really strange, I guess you'd call it an acid western. It's got a dreamy score, and it's gorgeous, and it's set in the Old West, and it's kind of, it's almost like a tone poem in a sense. Like I don't even know how to describe it. You just kind of have to let it wash over you and experience it.
Yeah, that one really connected with me rewatching it before this podcast. My number 6 is Trees Lounge by Steve Buscemi. It's his directorial debut. He plays a barfly who's really kind of down on his luck, and it's basically about the people in his life, the characters in his life, and the weird connection he has with his niece, played by the terrific Chloe Sevigny, in one of the first performances I really recognized her in. This movie, I don't know what it is about this movie that connected with me in 96, 97, whenever I saw it, but I rewatched it earlier this year, and I just absolutely, I think it's because of how relatively laid back and how adult it is, and how it really captures a moment where you kind of feel a bit aimless in life, and it's kind of hard to shake that aimlessness. And I, to a certain extent, I've had those moments in my life, and I think it's weird that I kind of maybe felt like that might be heading in my direction at the time, and now that I'm on the other side of that, for the most part, it really kind of resonates with me. So my number 6 was Trees Lounge, and we're going to go with Chelsea's number 5.
Oh my goodness. This could have easily been a number 1 for me. It's First Wives Club. I mean, Diane Keaton, Bette Midler, Maggie Smith, Goldie Hawn, everybody, Elizabeth Berkley, Marcia Gay Harden, Stockard Channing for like 2 seconds. This movie made so much money, and then they didn't want to make a sequel because they're like, do women pictures, do anybody even want to watch these? And I'm like, yes, of course we do. It's the greatest film ever made. This probably could have been my number 1, but also it's my number 5.
It'd be interesting. I'd be curious to see if somebody could convince Paramount Plus to do a sequel of this. That would be.
Well, they have the TV series now.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Yes,
I thought there was a TV or series or something. Okay.
One of my friends plays one of the hot husbands, and so it's been a
Ooh,
fun
I approve
watch
of
for sure.
hots.
I'll send you a link.
So
yes, please. Yeah.
So Grace's number 5 we'll get to a little bit later. Matthew, what is your number 5?
My number 5 is Independence Day, which is interesting because I'm not a huge Roland Emmerich fan. Like, the kind of movies he's been making lately don't really interest me, but this
Those are bad.
is, well, yeah. I was trying to be more diplomatic, thank you. But yeah, like, this is kind of the perfect kind of distillation of what he does well. He makes, big, flashy, pretty movies with good with a really great cast. And looking at it again, it's really easy to tell why that was the moment that Will Smith broke.
I've shit talked his Godzilla on here before. We can just admit that he's made bad films. Yeah, I love Independence Day. I've had some great memories rewatching that and watching that in theaters. My number 5 is honestly one of my 5 favorite films of all time is Dan Ireland's The Whole Wide World. It's currently on Tubi. It's inspired by the true story of Novelyn Price, a teacher from Texas, and the relationship that she had with Robert E. Howard, the pulp writer, creator of Conan the Barbarian. This movie really landed with me. I've written on the site about how I kind of came to it in discussing this year in general, and the performances by Renee Zellweger and Vincent D'Onofrio are just absolutely lovely in this film. The score by Hans Zimmer and Harry Gregson Williams, it's very melodramatic, it's very soap opera, but it's also very serious and very emotional. And it's about, they consider it a love story, but it doesn't really, it's never really connected with me as a love story because there's not much romance in there, but it's a friendship. And seeing the effect that this friendship had on Novelyn by the end is just absolutely beautiful, and the performances are great. And I could go on about The Whole Wide World at length, but we will continue on with number 4. And Grace and Chels actually had the same number 4, and is Matthew's number 9. What movie am I missing out on?
You mean Jack?
I mean Jack? Robin Williams is Jack?
No.
Journey Smollett?
Journey Smollett. Oof. She's an icon. But I have to say, Matilda deserves to be on everyone's forever ever list because Danny DeVito, and like Matthew said earlier, everyone that was in a movie that also directed that movie that had their directorial debut that year kind of nailed it. I felt like the narration behind Danny was, even though Roald Dahl sounded nothing like Danny DeVito, it felt like it was, a perfect adaptation of a book. And I know that it definitely strayed from the book a little, but the fact that you have Pee Wee Herman checking on Danny DeVito's car business at length.
Yeah.
You've got, Mara Wilson, who is such a star, especially after Doubtfire and everything. She's just, I think she's perfect, and her book is great, and blah blah blah. If you follow her on Twitter, she's iconic. But I think when you think about "Send Me on My Way" by Rusted Root, you think of the end frame of this movie with her and Miss Honey having a tea party. It's perfect. It's formative to any young person, and I love it.
This film is why I'm gay. So
yeah, that makes sense. It's
when
why
they say Danny DeVito, I love your work. This is what they're talking about.
They're talking about this specific movie every time. They've never seen It's Always Sunny.
Exactly.
Death to Smoochie gets no love. But yes, Matilda's great. And if he has to be remembered for one thing, that's it. That's totally worth it.
Yeah, watching this film, I think this was my first time watching this. I could have sworn I had seen it at the time, but I don't know that I had seen it. But I will say, watching this movie yesterday, it reminded me how great Danny DeVito is as a narrator between this and LA Confidential. And it's a lovely film. This was actually Matthew's number 3, and Chelsea's number 2, and Grace's number 5. I was actually referring to Mike Nichols' The Birdcage.
Oh, also.
Get to all of them.
I mean, we can wrap up thoughts on Matilda because, again, my top 5 all could be a number 1. This is the one film my dad bought the VHS for my cousin for her birthday, and I wanted it so bad my dad opened my cousin's birthday present for me and let me have it, and it was wonderful. But if we want to talk about The Birdcage, I will say, what a completely perfect film outside of Hank Azaria. That is, everything is... Yeah.
And I want to say this, because I did do the rewatch just because we are both going to talk about it. I cannot blame him as much as I blame Lovingly, the director.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people of color, even honestly speaking for myself in recent years, I have always been told, I was always told, oh, you're this, you can play XYZ, name an ethnicity, and I was eligible. So I would go, oh, okay, I can do that. Sure, get work, you know? And
It's
so
the system, yeah.
yeah, and so I don't want to totally put the onus on him, even though like he's the face of that choice.
Exactly.
But I agree with you. It's very painful now because I used to sing along. He works hard for the money, and now I'm like, absolutely not.
And it sucks because I know drag queens. He consulted
Right.
them on how to create the character
Yeah.
and stuff, and he was just, you know, the 90s were a time. But also, I think The Birdcage has one of the best married couples of all time with Robin Williams and Nathan Lane. It's just to show this loving family dynamic. And then Callista Flockhart is supposed to be playing 18, and she's like 30 or
I
something.
know. Yeah.
And yet,
was like,
I believe her as so young.
Yeah, and also the boy that she's supposed to be marrying, he wrote Foxcatcher. Do you guys remember that?
Yep.
He's
Yes.
a screenwriter
Yes.
now.
And
I
yet
was
he is
standing-
the perfect, like, face of somebody who looks like the child of Christine Baranski, the light of my life, and Robin Williams. I am like, this is like, everything in this film is perfect, and it's not a long film. It's what, an hour and a half?
Yeah, it's nothing. I mean, it's the
Diane
perfect like
Weiss?
morsel. Diane Weiss, okay.
Every
Gene
line,
Hackman?
every word. Gene Hackman.
Oh, there's something in the bowls. I mean, every part of it is so iconic. But like, I think that what I want to say is that like between the fact that like Mike Nichols to me is one of the most perfect, lovely American directors we will ever have, truly, because he came from like an improv and like actors and artists and storyteller background. The fact that he is back again, artistically, marriage-wise, with Elaine May working on this film.
Such a huge thing for me.
Yeah, and Nichols and May together again doing this piece based on La Cage aux Folles. It's just, I've never seen a more perfect soup, if you will.
I mean, perfect screenplay, like awards, whatever. Elaine May should have won. Like,
That's
it is
right.
perfect top to bottom. It does not waste a second. I love it.
Nope.
Watching the film again recently, the thing that really captured me was how much love that couple has for Val, because they're willing to go through this awful thing that they never should have even been asked to do, and yet, I mean, they protest, but they do it. And I kind of love how, in a weird way, the way they redress the apartment and everything is almost like a parody of straight people. Like, this is what they think we are. We live in churches, and, you know, we have just the church furniture and all this stuff, and we have just a big crucifix on the wall, and that's it. And I kind of love it as sort of a parody of, you know, we've seen so many things where this is some straight person's idea of what a queer person is supposed to be. And I like the idea that this is kind of turning it back on us, like, this is a parody of what y'all think the straight people are. And I kind of, but some of those scenes, like the one where Nathan Lane walks out of the bathroom wearing that suit for the first time, and there's that quiet resignation, and the fact that the love for this character just pours out of it, and it's just so marvelous. And I want to point out one thing that really interests me. Apparently, Hank Azaria was a big fan, was friends with Billy Bob Thornton, and they would go on drives in character, and just, you know, he was working on Sling Blade at the time. And so if you can imagine that character and that character in a car together, it must have been amazing.
I watched that movie too early in my life, and I looked at my mom once and I said, oh no, what if one day I put a baby in a box? And that's all I want to say on that movie.
Birdcage is hilarious. I will just say Nathan Lane robbed of an Oscar nomination. He should have been nominated for that. It was tremendous. So my number 4 is going to be a bit later. Matthew, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is The Frighteners, actually. And I, for some reason, can't get into the Lord of the Rings movies. I appreciate all that they are, well, the accomplishment they are, but Something about his Peter Jackson's grassroots New Zealand films are the ones that really resonate with me. There's something about that level of craziness that I really adore, and The Frighteners is just that with a bigger budget. I love that it's the same kind of humor he had with Brain Dead or Dead Alive, whichever you want to call it, but it's with studio funding and a brilliant cast of actors. And I just think it's a marvelous kind of achievement because he was able to balance this really strange sense of humor with getting the ghost effects. And I feel like, I guess because the Hobbit movies are more somber, but there's something about that freewheeling craziness of those movies that I just adore, and I want him to keep making those movies forever.
Yeah. I will say this was another university screening room movie for me, and when Jeffrey Combs comes on screen, like everybody howled. It was just absolutely glorious. Yeah, I love the Frighteners. Even after the Lord of the Rings movies, it's a shame that Peter Jackson's felt the need to really go big and epic with since the Lord of the Rings. I'm like you. I would love to see him go small again. And yeah, this is just such a fun movie. So we're going to go ahead and go to number 3. We've already talked about Matilda, which was Matthew's choice. Grace, what was your number 3?
So my number 3 is arguably, I have said this on occasion, and I will say it now definitively. It is the sexiest, not sexy movie ever that will ever be. Ever. This is The English Patient. You should have known what I was saying based on that precursor, but it is The English Patient, which of course is probably the most decorated movie of all the ones that we've talked about for that year because it was nominated for, I believe, 11 Academy Awards. It won 9. So I don't have to talk about like who won what because obviously like top to bottom, Kristen Scott Thomas, Ralph Fiennes, everybody is Juliette Binoche, like everybody in this film is just like perfectly iconic. But what's kukulooku to me is that like I can frame by frame picture like Kristen Scott Thomas standing and then Ralph Fiennes like grabbing her waist without being too graphic, and then her like slapping his back like, no, don't touch me. But then you're like, no, touch each other. And it is just so hot. It's a long movie. It's egregious, but it was one of those movies that when I was starting out as a young person into film, being like, this is a film to me. Like it's one of the most epic films of, I think, that decade, because we had kind of stopped doing those big budget on location war movies. I feel like in the 80s, like we kind of were like, yeah, okay, Full Metal Jacket and stop there. And I think that this one is just, when I think of that year, I think of this movie.
It's funny that you mentioned one of the movies that was not actually filmed on location, but filmed in England, but with Full Metal Jacket. But no, you're right. Like the 90s had epics come back in a big way with Dances with Wolves, with Braveheart, with Titanic the next year. I mean, clearly it was what the Academy was into. I think I respect this movie more than I like it. It is a gorgeous movie to look at. John Seale's fantastic. The performances are good. I do really like the score here. I just, it's a movie I respect more than I like. I certainly don't hate it the way Elaine Bettis does. But yeah, it's one of those movies where it's a good movie for me, but I'm not sure if I'm necessarily going to watch it again.
I mean, Count Chocula won an Oscar. It was wonderful for me. I love Juliette Binoche.
Yeah.
She is marvelous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my number 3, and this was also Grace's number 8, is Cameron Crowe's Jerry Maguire. I posted yesterday, I believe, because yesterday I think was 25th anniversary of it releasing. Tom Cruise should have won Best Actor for this. This is one of the best performances he has ever given. Renee Zellweger, her performance in The Whole Wide World was actually what got her on Cameron Crowe's radar for Jerry Maguire, and she is wonderful in this. This is another example of an adult romantic comedy, an adult movie that really deals with being a grown-up and being what responsibilities come with in terms of your career, in terms of your family. And it's also got a great sports angle, which I have a weakness for, in Cuba Gooding Jr.'s performance as Rod Tidwell. And I've grown to absolutely love this movie more and more every time I watch it. It is just a wonderful film.
Yeah, okay, fine. I'll talk about Jonathan Lipnicki. I'm glad you asked. I've been obsessed with him ever since this film came out, and then I collected the Teen Vogues that he was in talking about my friend is a vampire or whatever it was. He is adorable in this film. He is such a little star. And then in Stuart Little, wow, you blow my mind. He's still an actor, and also he teaches jujitsu, and you should follow him on Instagram. Anyways, but this film perfectly encapsulates, I think, Cameron Crowe's stake on pop culture. It's so quotable. His use of the Secret Garden song by Bruce Springsteen, also very sexy. Thin straps on Renee Zellweger, very important to me as a person. There's like the girl club. You could play. I don't know anybody that can't quote this film that doesn't. Even
I remember being a
it.
5-year-old and quoting this film. Like, I wanted to see this film, and my parents wouldn't let me. And I'm like, why not? That kid's in it. Jonathan Lipnicki.
Jonathan Lipnicki.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, he's in it. I should be able to watch it. There's a kid.
He's so adorable in this. But I also want to say that, isn't it Kelly Preston who also plays like the intense girlfriend? The way that they bang in that movie is also really, it's burned into my brain, but also rest in peace to her and her gorgeous bod.
So gorgeous.
It's so interesting the way that movie kind of straddled the two audiences. Like, it was pitched, they had different trailers even for different movies to kind of pitch it to guys. It's a sports movie. It's got Tom Cruise, and then there was another one aimed at the romantic comedy angle. And I kind of love the idea that it was able to just marry these two audiences. If you'll pardon my poor wording there. Like, I'm kind of fascinated by the way, almost more than the movie, I'm fascinated by the ad campaign. It was kind of fascinating to the different approaches they took to it.
Yeah, it's really a terrific film. I love it the more every time I see it just a little bit more. Chels, was your number 3?
Oh goodness, my number 3. Sorry, I don't do math. My number 3, again, remember how I said I love being gay doing crimes? That's what Queen Latifah is doing in Set It Off. Also starring Jada Pinkett, Before Smith, Vivica A. Fox, Kimberly Elise, the doctor from Scrubs, Blair Underwood being hot, bank robbery. One of the best, like, Queen Latifah versus the police shoot-offs ever, like riding off into the sunset. It is so much fun. Again, I don't want to talk too much about it because it is also just a mood, but also more respect to this film. Like, I feel like everybody talks about their cool films, and I'm like, F. Gary Gray made like the best bank robbery crime film with Set It Off. So I'm like, everyone go watch it. These women are perfect. I love it. I love it.
It really is a terrific film. I wish I had gotten a chance to see it again because I really loved it. And it really solidified F. Gary Gray as somebody to pay attention to. It's a shame his Fast and Furious movie didn't work out because he does do action so well, as evidence in this.
He does, but Fate of the Furious was not it for me. It was not. Go back to Set It Off, my dude. Yes, I love all the Fast and the Furious films. I love them.
So we are up to number 2. And Matthew, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is Evita. I could go on and on and on about this movie. This is something I think about. I think about this movie almost every day. Like, it was so fundamental to how I understand politics, to how I understand the media, the way we treat women in society. Like, there's so much I could go on about, and I'm not even sure how far I should go into it. But it fascinates me that they took a rock opera about a real person and they were able to show the good things and the bad. Like everything that she was ever criticized for, you'll hear about. Everything that she did that was great, you'll hear about. I kind of love that you still see a lot of the same kind of political theater today. Like every time I see a politician in their shirt sleeves wearing some sort of unscuffed work boot, I always think about Juan Padron taking off his jacket and, the crowd cheers, that kind of populist politics. Anytime I hear about some kind of foundation where they're skimming money off the top, I think about the Foundation Neva Padron. I think about, some of the radical politics that I'm hearing about now, like, are reminiscent of things that happened in that story. And I think it was really interesting the way they laid it out. And usually when you do some kind of biopic, the tendency is to over romanticize too much. And I love the idea that the lead character, other than Ava, is one of her biggest critics. I think it's fascinating to see the way she is perceived outside of herself portrayed in the story, as opposed to just being like, oh, well, this is our subject, so everything she did is perfect, bye. And, if we're being fair, they probably leaned a little too hard on Che. I think that he probably should butt out in a few scenes here and there. But I think it's a really fascinating way to tell a story. And the performances are marvelous. I think it's Antonio Banderas' best performance in English. I think Madonna's marvelous. And I think Jonathan Pryce, by the way, is really underrated. He's a marvelous sort of utility player. I love how he can do something kind of kooky like Brazil, or he can be the president in the G.I. Joe movies. He can, I love that he can do pretty much anything. You put him in any kind of place, just wind him up, and he's perfect for whatever it needs to be.
Yeah. I think rewatching this really kind of just pinpoint that maybe I'm just not that big a fan of Andrew Lloyd Webber, because it's funny because reading up on this, it's like this originated as a concept album before it was a musical, and I feel like that kind of makes a lot of sense when you watch it, because
most of his stuff was like, if you look at Jesus Christ Superstar and Evita, like he kind of always goes like, I'm gonna write music, hope a story works out.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I was with this, where it's like, I feel like, certainly we get moments, and they're wonderful performances vocally. I agree with you on Banderas. Hollywood should have given them more musicals. It's a shame that they didn't. And Madonna is good, but overall, I just have very mixed feelings about this. I always kind of have.
If I can throw shade, I'm pretty sure the Evita song won the Oscar for Best Song, and That Thing You Do should have won. That's my shade.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not going to argue with you on that one. You're absolutely right on that one.
You mean the gratuitous song that was written specifically for the film that was only
and they wouldn't even give Madonna credit, even though she contributed to it.
That only exists to win an Oscar. Yeah, I would say That Thing You Do definitely should have won. But it really should have. That was a terrific song.
So the original concept album is a little more rock based in its arrangements. It's this one, by the way, if you go looking for it.
Oh, okay.
It's it has, every single version of it is a little bit different because they swap out a song here or there, or they change some lyrics. The colloquialisms in this one are more British.
Yeah. Okay.
So, during Good Night and Thank You, they say, rather than the gesture, which is in the film, it's up yours in the Broadway, it's get stuffed in the British versions.
Okay.
And so, this is the American one, which is a little more orchestral. So the film is kind of a hybrid between the two of them. It has a little more guitar-based stuff here and a little bit more orchestra there. And in some ways, it's kind of sort of uneasy in some places.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an interesting experiment. And I kind of like how crazy it is, because there are parts where you'll hear the same kind of theme under two different scenes that are sort of playing off the irony of a similar idea. Like there's parts where you'll hear something that played in another part, and it's kind of commenting on an emotion from earlier, and it's a bit too chaotic, but it's very interesting to hear some of these ideas played out musically. But you kind of have to listen to it a bunch of times to hear some of those.
Yeah.
And if it's something that you're not super into, it could be kind of alienating and maybe a little bit hard to really look for.
Well, it was funny because by the time Evita came out, I had seen Pink Floyd The Wall. And so
Right.
it's like, you can definitely tell that, like, there's some visual ideas with the music that Alan Parker's sort of echoing from The Wall. And I think that's part of the reason that I have a hard time kind of connecting with it from a musical standpoint. Plus, I mean, honestly, like, you know, with Phantom, like, I've never really been high on that musical. And of course, I mean, there are very few adaptations of that story that I've been that interested in anyway. But, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, well, maybe Lloyd Webber's just not for me. I mean,
by and large, he isn't for me either, honestly. This is one of the few that I like. And God help us, when he does his own lyrics, they're even, like, they're dumb and unsubtle. Like, the stuff he does with Tim Rice is sort of the cream of it.
yeah.
And so, but like, if you ever chance upon Sunset Boulevard, like, the score is lush and the arrangements are gorgeous. The music is wonderful, but the lyrics are dumb things. And like, it basically just takes every scene from the movie and transplants it. There's not really much invention. There isn't really much that makes it interesting in and of itself. So like, if you're not a big fan, you can kind of keep your distance. It's fine. But he does have a way with a melody, and I wish that he would continue to collaborate with better lyricists, because I feel like the stuff with Tim Rice really brought out the best in him. But when he writes his own lyrics, they tend to be kind of clunky, and I don't know. I understand why they're kind of splashy, and I understand why people like them, but yeah.
So my number 2 is Spike Lee's Get on the Bus. He got funding from some of the biggest names in Hollywood to tell a very simple story about characters going to the Million Man March in Washington. And this is one of Spike's best films. Is just it's what he does best, which is mixing political with personal, and the ways that those different generations view different problems, different ideas in society, and is absolutely wonderful. Ossie Davis is wonderful in this movie. I absolutely adore him in any movie I see. That brings us to number 1, and we're gonna start off with Grace. What is your number 1?
So my number 1 is Romeo and Juliet. If you want to say plus Juliet, so you know which one we're referencing, great. But I rewatched it last night, even because I actually probably watch this once a year. But Baz Luhrmann making a stamp and saying, this is my style. This is what pop culture is going to look like for all of you youths for the next 25 years. Solidifying Leo as a star after Gilbert Grape, because he hadn't even heard of Leonardo DiCaprio when he cast this. He just thought he was like a model or a pop singer when he saw his photo come across his desk. And then all of a sudden he was like, oh, wait, this guy he's just hearing about Gilbert Grape. And I'm like, you didn't see the Basketball Diaries, sir. But this, and also like Natalie Portman was considered for Juliet, but she looked too young in the screen test. So then they went with Claire Danes because one person on staff was like, have you seen My So-Called Life? It is good. And look at this new person. But like the fact that we have Paul Rudd in an astronaut suit in a film before Clueless, come on. Like it's so, there's just such a beautiful, perfect, and people that like Baz Luhrmann like this movie. If you don't like Baz Luhrmann, you don't like any of his movies because he has such a distinct style. And I think that any Tumblr girl in the past 10 years will tell you that one of these photos of her in the little wings and then like fireworks going off in the background was part of the feed. It just was. It's part of culture. It's part of queer culture. The music, even like Desiree's Kissing You, anytime I have it on my shuffle, I picture the whole scene where they're like about to touch their hands across the little aquarium. And it's just, to me, it's such a great representation of Shakespeare's work, even though I famously don't like Shakespeare. I named 2 Shakespearean movies for this year because I thought that they were really wonderful adaptations and they made me want to study this literature. And then I famously didn't, but I would rewatch these films. And so
every high school English class thanks this film because
that's right.
I had to watch the Zeffirelli version and this version back to back in class as we were reading it aloud. And I'm like, damn. Well, one is definitely more fun than the other. Mercutio, like way more fun.
Yeah, I saw, and oh my gosh, I don't want to butcher his name. I saw the guy who plays Romeo's best friend a couple of years ago in the Cherry Orchard in Roundabouts on Broadway. And he was so good. And I was just like, yeah, sorry, I forgot that you're absolutely iconic. His name is Harold Perrineau.
Yep.
Him like doing this whole like semi-drag bit, but also just like maybe fluidly just wants to dress like that as masculine presence. I don't really give a shit, but that's what I love about Baz Luhrmann's films is they never tried to be like, and this is the gay one. Like it was just like letting people be how they wanted to be, and the costume design, his wife, perfectly reflects it. And I just can't say enough of how unfortunately nostalgic this movie is for me.
I'm going to
I
put
would like
out.
to disagree on one point. Something about Baz Luhrmann's style I find kind of alienating, but I love Strictly Ballroom.
Oh
So
yeah, and
there's
that's
one.
kind of before I feel like that's before he said like, this is my thing though. And so that makes sense that that's your favorite one because it was to me the least Baz Luhrmann one.
Yeah, once he dug his heels into the style and the pizzazz, which I famously, as his films are coming out, I like them less and less.
Yes.
So,
Great Gatsby, I think, was the end of an era. And like Australia, like I think everybody just
ask me about getting
Nobody
motion
liked
sickness in that
Australia.
movie.
Nobody liked Australia.
Yeah.
I
Kind of a shame.
kind of liked Australia, but anyway, no, I will say I do really like this. This was another university screening room one. It started my crush on Claire Danes at the time, and I think that Leo is better in this than he is in Titanic. That's all I'm going to say on that.
Oh yeah. You could definitely argue that.
For one. Yeah.
Yeah. He's also just given probably so much coaching, I mean, about, this text and everything. So he had freedom, but it was also like, hey, deliver this story that we've seen told a billion times.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Chels, what is your number one?
My number one's probably something most people have not watched. It is Cheryl Dunye's The Watermelon Woman. It takes like a documentary approach to a fictional story. Cheryl, she plays a version of herself, Black lesbian filmmaker, and her big project is she's trying to like discover who the Watermelon Woman was, who was this famous actress in quotes from the 30s and 40s, and she played a lot of mammy characters, and she was credited as the Watermelon Woman. And Cheryl spends the whole time trying to investigate this woman, find her identity, figure out who she is, but also she's like figuring out dating and her friendship with her like coworker / best friend / videographer friend. They're all trying to figure that out. And it talks about like dating white women in this time. And it's like queer women actually like playing queer characters in this. And at the very end, it tells you the Watermelon Woman is a fake character because they recreated and completely made all of this archive footage with an actress. And it's so convincing when you watch it. And then you see that this film was made for like $300,000. And it was so hard to find for so long, but recently it got like a good remastering Blu-ray DVD release. And it is such a weirdly specific film and style. And it's something I always go back to. And again, I'm a queer woman, very loud about it. And whenever Cheryl is like credited as the first Black lesbian director to make a film. And I'm like, that's probably not true. We just probably weren't talking so loud about it.
Yep.
Exactly. But it's very cool that she was able to be out and make a very happy queer film in this way. And I just recommend it for anybody who likes film history, but also just something different. And it's a film most people probably haven't seen.
I know I don't remember if I'd ever even heard of this before I got your list, but it ended up being the last film I watched.
People only bring it up every June during Pride Month, whenever the Criterion channel puts it on for like 12 minutes. I think it is on Showtime right now, though, so everyone go watch it or just go rent it. It's only like a couple bucks to rent. Yeah. I mean, it's only 90 minutes. It's worth your time.
It's on Hulu.
Hulu?
It's on Hulu.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Go Hulu.
I'll watch tonight.
This was actually my last film to watch before the podcast. I watched it this afternoon. I absolutely agree with you that people should be watching this movie. More people should be watching this movie. This is a really entertaining movie for everything that Chels said. I'm glad that I'm familiar with it now, and it's really an entertaining film. And yeah, when they bring up that card at the end where it's like, oh, the Watermelon Woman is fiction, it's like, oh my God, really? It's
whenever you're looking, it's like they are going through archives and you see all this footage that looks so real. And just the fact that they were able to pull this off to the point that so many people must not have stayed through the credits because they thought for a long time the Watermelon Woman was a real person. Like that was a whole myth after the film came out. It's just wild. Also, it has like I cannot believe that a Black queer woman got to direct herself in a very like pretty detailed sex scene. And it's also like so realistic and beautifully done and not just like super gazy, even though you see like everything. And it's just so well done. I just adore this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't had the chance to see it, but it sounds fascinating. And thank you for putting it on my radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I got you.
Absolutely. So we're actually going to go to my number one, which is the only film that's on all four of our lists. It is Joel and Ethan Coen's Fargo. And not only is this, for me, the best film of 1996, it's one of the best films ever. This was Frances McDormand's first Academy Award for one of the great characters, I think, in movie history. The fact that this movie is as dark comedy, as film noir, as crime thriller, and also has as much heart at the center of it is a credit to Marge Gunderson. And Joel Cohen wrote the character of a lifetime for his wife, and it is a masterpiece. Roger Deakins' cinematography is, the way he shoots snow is absolutely unmatched. Carter Burwell's score is absolutely beautiful. William H. Macy was tremendous in this movie. And then you have Peter Stormare, Steve Buscemi. And
canonically hot, but kind of funny looking.
Yeah, I loved it.
It's that New York fireman hot.
Ooh.
You've seen a hose.
Yeah. Also, shout out to John Carroll Lynch and them, like him and Frances being like one of the best cinema couples of all time. I just adore them. And she's just such a great wife. She leaves her work at work. And whenever she comes home, it's just them and their perfect little bubble of happiness. And it's just such a warm, heartfelt film that the Coens, they don't always bring that to their films, but this one
No.
just really captured something special.
Yeah, it really
And I
does.
think it's funny that you got this this really heartwarming thing in the center of a film that's full of snow, and
Yeah.
it's very cold otherwise. Like it's that one bright spot in the middle of this sort of desolate thing.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to wrap it up with my number 4 and Matthew's number 1. What do you have for us, Matthew?
That would be The People versus Larry Flint. I'm absolutely fascinated by this movie. Like we talked before about Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski. I love the way they approach what were at the time, was a living person. I love the way that they take unconventional characters and put them at the front. And I love that it's kind of a message movie, but it doesn't stop being fun.
Yeah.
Like I love the fact that it gives you the opportunity to try to care about the characters, unconventional though they are, but it still has a message. It still has something it wants to show you, but it doesn't get lost in trying all the speechifying. And another thing that I noticed while watching it recently is it's fascinating to see how much the world has changed in the time since that story takes place, because there's all these scenes where you have the the guards carrying him upstairs in this wheelchair, and now we have ramps everywhere, and
Yeah.
it's really astounding that it's this kind of bizarre picture of its era in very subtle and quiet ways. Like the film doesn't really call attention to them, but they're there. It's very much a snapshot of a moment in time and captured not too far afterwards, really. And I kind of love the crazy spirit of it. I don't particularly care for Larry Flint, but I love that he was willing to make a stand for a cause admittedly in a way that doesn't particularly interest me. But I remember Graham Norton, who's a UK TV presenter, said that he was the favorite interview subject because he loved how much he stood for his principles and how funny and engaging and open he was, and but also how open he was about his own problems and his own foibles, and that he didn't have a big head about himself.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely love this movie. This actually, I wrote a little blurb for a section that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had at the time, and this was actually my first published piece of writing, and it was. This is a movie that I absolutely loved. I love that, and it's wild to think that we had Alexander and Karaszewski had this and Mars Attacks out at the same time, and they couldn't be two completely different movies, but they really hit their stride in unconventional biopics, whether it's this, whether it's Ed Wood, whether it's Dolomite is My Name, whether it's Man on the Moon. That's what they excel at, and Milos Forman just absolutely taps into that beautifully, and the performances in this with Woody Harrelson, Edward Norton, Courtney Love, who was tremendous in this film. It's just a wonderful film, and I've always had a great amount of affection for this movie, and it's one that always really connected with me. With that said, that is it for our top 10 list. I want to thank Chelsea, Matthew, and Grace for joining me today to discuss this, to finish up this mammoth undertaking, and for bringing their own individual perspectives and their own personal interests to this discussion. I love that we had such a wide variety of films to discuss. It was really wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for having us.
And
that is the perfect response, though. Like, yes, you're welcome. Yes.
You're so welcome.
I did my homework. Miracles happen.
Everybody, I love, like I said, I love the list that everybody came up with. But that's gonna be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast for 2021. And I'm looking forward to what's gonna happen in 2022. That's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast and the 2021 season of the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My thank you to Chelsea, Grace, and Matthew for their time tonight and for doing a wonderful job of bringing some great movies to our attention and just in general to the discussion that I try to have with Sonic Cinema. I've got some exciting ideas in 2022 coming up. I've also got the Sundance Film Festival, the Renegade Film Festival, but more importantly, check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There's going to be a lot of great content there. The Sonic Cinema Podcast is available on pretty much everywhere where podcasts are. Subscribe, rate, and review if you can. It all helps. And you can follow me on social media. But more importantly, you can also follow me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.